Floyd Mayweather's own employees are finally speaking out, and what they're saying paints a very different picture of the boxing legend. From claims of unpaid wages to growing concerns about Mayweather's health, their stories are raising serious questions about his real condition. Let me break it down. It started outside a building on Highland Avenue in Los Angeles. Not a courthouse, not a press conference, a gym. Mayweather Boxing and Fitness, the franchise carrying his name and his brand, was the site where employees gathered with handwritten signs and a portable microphone to tell anyone who'd listen that they hadn't been paid. The signs weren't subtle. One read, "Modern-day slavery." Another said, "The team has no." A direct jab at the nickname Mayweather spent his career building. Protesting with signs and a microphone outside Mayweather Boxing plus Fitness Group, frustrated employees held signs that included messages such as "Modern-day slavery" and "The team has no." For a business tied to a man who made more money in a single fight night than most people see in a lifetime, that kind of language from his own staff landed hard. This wasn't an anonymous internet rumor. This was people standing in front of the building where they worked, saying it out loud on the record. The complaints went further than missing paychecks. Employees accused the gym of violating California labor law, not just failing to pay on time, but potentially owing back wages under specific wage statutes that carry real financial penalties for repeat violations. For second-time violations, that fine jumps to $200 for each unpaid employee, plus 25% of the amount unlawfully withheld. And there was a deadline attached to all of it. If wages are not paid for over 30 days, affected workers are entitled to full pay at their regular rate and could file a lawsuit against the gym. That's not a minor technicality. That's a legal mechanism designed to punish employers who let unpaid wages stack up. Some employees framed the situation as being trapped. One described the fear that keeps workers quiet even when they're not getting paid, because speaking up feels like risking whatever income is still coming. "We're out here just letting everybody know that they have not been treating us right." One worker said, "Even if you work for a different company and you ain't getting paid, you're scared to show up and say something because you know how businesses do." This wasn't a one-off. The demonstration had structure to it, repeated chants, coordinated signs, multiple employees taking turns at the microphone to share their own version of the same story. "Hard work, dedication, no pay," they would repeatedly chant, a clear riff on Mayweather's oft-mentioned slogan. One coach described the emotional and financial weight of the situation in blunt terms, connecting the unpaid wages directly to his family's well-being. "Honestly, it's been disheartening," said one coach at the gym when speaking on their grievances. "We haven't been getting paid fairly. It messes with your mental health. My wife had to go to the hospital from stress and anxiety from this job." He continued, saying they've accumulated debt from not being paid regularly. That's the part that turns this from a labor dispute into something more personal. A missed paycheck is a number on paper. A spouse ending up in a hospital from the stress of that missed paycheck is a different kind of story, and it's the kind of detail that made this protest spread beyond boxing media into general news coverage. One coach who'd been a member of the gym since 2018, before being offered a coaching role, laid out a pattern of broken promises that stretched back years, not weeks. He'd left a corporate job for what he thought would be a better opportunity, only to find himself dealing with unpaid wages on a consistent basis. "I was a member of Mayweather Boxing and Fitness since late 2018. Always loved the gym, always loved the studio, a big fan of Floyd. They offered me an opportunity to coach because I had boxing experience. I was like, man, this is going to be amazing. And since I've been here, it's just been a lot of false promises. I got promised a head position. I used to work a corporate job, quit my job to come here for a better opportunity for myself. And then I have to deal with unpaid wages on a consistent basis." He said there were stretches where an entire month passed without a paycheck. "There's been times when I've went over a month without getting paid. For someone who quit a stable job specifically to work under the Mayweather name, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's a financial gamble that didn't pay off the way he expected." Even management wasn't spared. The location's general manager, Samaria Bolden, joined the protest alongside the staff she was supposed to be overseeing, admitting she'd inherited a broken situation from day one. Even the location's general manager, Samaria Bolden, took part in the protest, and shared in the frustration with her fellow employees. I started working here in September 2023, and on my first day of employment, the team was not employed. And from that day, I've always been worried, but I just thought I could help turn this around. And I was fed with lies from the beginning. We have lost everything. I've lost so much in not getting paid on time. The rent situation made things worse. Employees said the location itself was at risk of shutting down because the landlord hadn't been paid either, which meant the paychecks weren't the only thing hanging in the balance. Their jobs were too. Several employees at Floyd Mayweather's gym in Los Angeles have staged a protest claiming they haven't been compensated for several weeks, the Daily Mail reports. Also, they claim that the location is being shut down because the rent hasn't been paid. This wasn't the first Mayweather-branded location to run into this exact problem. A separate club in Elk Grove, California had already closed after a lawsuit over unpaid rent. In May, a Mayweather Boxing Plus Fitness Club in Elk Grove, CA, shut down after its landlord sued for missing $30,000 in rent payments. Two locations, same complaint, same pattern. What made the situation feel even stranger to the employees was the uncertainty about whether Mayweather himself even knew what was happening at a gym that carried his own name. Staff said they'd been instructed not to raise the issue with him directly. Some of the fitness workers say they are not aware if Mayweather knows about their complaints. Who knows if he's aware or not? We don't, one worker said. I was told that we can't tell him, and I can't tell him that our studio's closing. He was here 2 weeks ago. That detail is worth sitting with. A gym bearing his exact name, employing people who wear his brand on their shirts. And the workers there weren't sure if the man himself knew rent wasn't being paid. One employee said flatly they'd been told to keep quiet about the closure risk. I was told that we can't tell him, and I can't tell him that our studio's closing. He was here 2 weeks ago. We've been silenced. It raises an obvious question for anyone watching from the outside. How does a business with a billionaire's name attached to it end up this disorganized? Mayweather's overall career earnings weren't in dispute, although Mayweather has earned more than $1.2 billion from boxing. This is not his business enterprise that has had financial trouble. The money from the ring was real. What employees were describing was a separate operation, apparently running on fumes. Other outlets picked up the story fast, and the framing was consistent everywhere. A business under Mayweather's name, in visible financial distress, with the people at the bottom of that business absorbing the consequences first. The workers at Floyd Mayweather's Los Angeles-based gym are protesting their A-list employer over unpaid wages. The Mayweather boxing and fitness employees claim that they have worked without pay for multiple weeks, leading to this demonstration against the establishment and its owner. The math didn't add up for a lot of people watching from the outside. Mayweather's public image had always been built on excess. Private jets, luxury cars, cash counted out in stacks on camera. Reports pegged his net worth in the hundreds of millions, even during the dispute. Mayweather is known for his luxurious lifestyle and affinity for acquiring cash, which led to his moniker, Money. Aided by the lofty checks he has earned throughout his successful boxing career, he has an estimated net worth of $400 million. Given that backdrop, staff who weren't getting paid felt the contradiction directly. Given this, those on his payroll are fed up with their unpaid wages. We're out here just letting everybody know that they have not been treating us right, explained one employee to the Daily Mail. It's one thing to hear about wealth in the abstract. It's another to be the person standing outside that wealth's gym, unpaid, holding a sign. The legal exposure for the business kept growing the longer this went unresolved. The Daily Mail reported that if he does not grant their checks after 30 days, the employees can potentially receive a full day's wages for each day they remain unpaid. That penalty structure meant every week of silence made the eventual bill bigger, not smaller. Financially, for a man who once made $275 million from a single fight, penalties tied to a handful of gym paychecks should have been trivial to absorb. At the height of his boxing career, Mayweather made $275 million in one night for his 2018 match against Conor McGregor. As reported by Forbes, that contrast, 9 figures from one fight night against weeks of missing 4-figure paychecks for gym staff, became the entire story in a single image. It wasn't just this location either. The employees pointed to a broader pattern across the Mayweather boxing and fitness franchise, suggesting the Highland Avenue situation wasn't an isolated hiccup, but part of something systemic within the business. Mayweather had another California location that shut down after facing a lawsuit over unpaid rent. By the time national outlets picked the story up, the framing had shifted from gym drama to something closer to a referendum on how Mayweather ran the businesses that carried his name once the cameras from his boxing career weren't rolling anymore. The broader financial picture around Mayweather only got messier as 2026 rolled on, giving the gym walkout a strange kind of prequel status. It had been the first visible crack, months before the bigger legal storm hit. Reports of unpaid wages and what employees described as exploitative practices became just one item on a growing list. Beyond the ring, Mayweather's behavior has also been problematic, with former employees and associates accusing him of unpaid wages and exploitative practices. What the gym protest revealed more than anything else was a gap between the myth of Floyd Mayweather, cash-obsessed, unbothered, always on top, and the operational reality of businesses running under his brand. Staff on the ground floor of that brand were the first to describe what that reality actually felt like day to day. And once that first crack was public, it didn't stay contained to one gym in Los Angeles. Lawsuits, felony charges, IRS liens, and financial disputes with former partners were all coming next, turning what started as a wage dispute into a much bigger financial story that would follow Mayweather through the following year. It's worth pausing on why this particular story cut through the noise the way it did. Mayweather had weathered plenty of controversy before: legal trouble, personal scandal, criticism over his past. None of it dented the brand much, because none of it touched the one thing his entire persona was built on: money, and lots of it always flowing. This was different because it came from people who worked for him, describing their own lived financial hardship, tied directly to his company's name. It wasn't a tabloid rumor about his spending habits. It was payroll records, labor code violations, and workers standing outside a locked gym. That distinction mattered enormously for how the story spread. Boxing outlets, entertainment sites, and general news properties all ran versions of it because it wasn't speculative. It was documented, on camera, with named employees willing to put their faces to the complaint. Text. The protest also exposed something about how fast a well-known brand can wobble once the underlying business isn't sound. Mayweather Boxing and Fitness had been marketed as a franchise success story, an extension of his in-ring dominance into the fitness industry. Since his retirement, he has focused on making lucrative financial decisions outside the ring. One of those was to launch his Mayweather Boxing and Fitness gym franchise. It was hoped others could replicate Floyd's success by following in his footsteps. Instead, what employees described was a franchise struggling to meet basic payroll obligations at multiple locations, with a general manager who said she inherited chaos from her literal first day on the job. That's a steep drop for a business built entirely around one man's name and reputation. None of it stayed confined to the gym floor for long, either. Within months, the financial questions swirling around Mayweather expanded into courtrooms, tax liens, and multiple lawsuits. Some filed by him, some filed against him, that would dominate headlines through the first half of 2026. By the time reporters started asking Mayweather directly about his finances, the gym walkout had already planted a seed of doubt that no amount of denial could fully erase. Workers had said it themselves, on record, months before the bigger legal fights broke. That's the thing about employees speaking up. Once the first group does it, it becomes much harder to dismiss the next group that follows. And follow they did, because the financial turbulence around Mayweather in 2026 didn't stay limited to gym staff. It reached lawyers, prosecutors, and eventually a federal judge. The gym parking lot protest turned out to be the opening chapter of a much longer financial story, one that would eventually put Mayweather in front of felony charges, IRS liens, and a $175 million lawsuit of his own. That's where the story goes next. Before getting into the courtroom fights, it's worth understanding the scale of what Mayweather had built and lost control of. His career earnings placed him among the wealthiest athletes to ever compete. Mayweather made an estimated $1.16 billion since he turned pro in 1996 after the Atlanta Olympics. He ranks 10th among the highest paid athletes of all time, with inflation-adjusted career earnings of $1.57 billion. Michael Jordan is number 1 at $4.5 billion. That kind of money doesn't just disappear without a story behind it. And the story employees were pointing to wasn't really about boxing purses at all. It was about what happened to that money once it left the ring and got funneled into businesses, real estate, and advisors who had access to it. Mayweather built his own promotional structure, specifically to control every revenue stream himself. During his first decade as a pro, Floyd was promoted as Pretty Boy by his promoter, Bob Arum. In 2006, Mayweather paid $750,000 to opt out of his top-ranked contract and started promoting his own fights under a new Money Mayweather moniker. By controlling all of the revenue streams as the promoter, Mayweather's paychecks soared. That control made him one of the richest fighters ever, with 2 separate 9-figure paydays to his name. He is the only boxer to pocket more than $200 million from a fight. And he did it twice, first against Manny Pacquiao in 2015, and then versus Conor McGregor in 2017, when he raked in a record $275 million for his final bout as a pro, which brought his career record to 50-0. But controlling every revenue stream also meant there was no outside structure checking how that money got managed once it landed in his accounts. When the gym employees said they didn't know if Floyd even knew about their unpaid wages, that fit a pattern other people close to his business would later describe too. A sprawling operation where oversight wasn't always what it should have been. That gap between staggering career earnings and on-the-ground financial chaos is exactly what made the employee protest so jarring in the first place. It wasn't a story about a broke fighter. It was a story about a billion-dollar name attached to a business that couldn't make payroll. The employees who spoke up didn't do it anonymously either. They gave their names, their positions, and specific dates tied to their hiring, which gave the story a level of detail that made it hard to dismiss as disgruntled exaggeration. That specificity is part of why the story kept getting picked up months and even a year later, whenever new Mayweather financial headlines broke. Every time a new lawsuit or lien surfaced in 2026, outlets referenced the gym walkout as prior evidence of a pattern, not a standalone incident. Beyond the ring, Mayweather's behavior has also been problematic, with former employees and associates accusing him of unpaid wages and exploitative practices. That's a business reporter's way of saying, "We've seen this movie before." And that pattern is exactly what makes the rest of this story make sense. Once you understand that the people closest to Mayweather's day-to-day operations were already raising alarms in the gym parking lot, it's a lot less surprising to see the same themes show up in federal court filings a year later. There's also a human cost angle here that's easy to lose in the numbers. The coach whose wife ended up in the hospital from stress wasn't speaking abstractly about corporate mismanagement. He was describing a direct line between his employer's financial disorder and his family's health. That's not a detail that shows up in a court filing, but it's the kind of detail that sticks with viewers. Multiple employees described debt accumulation directly tied to missed paychecks, which meant the fallout from Mayweather's business troubles didn't stay contained to his own balance sheet. It spread outward to people who had no control over decisions being made above their pay grade. That's the real definition of condition this story is built around. Not just Mayweather's personal finances, but the condition of the people whose livelihoods depended on a business carrying his name functioning properly. And that business, according to the people running its front lines, wasn't functioning properly at all. So heading into the next chapter of this story, keep that image in mind. A general manager who inherited a broken paycheck system on day one. A coach who quit a stable job chasing the Mayweather name. And staff instructed to stay quiet about a looming closure. That's the starting point. From there, the story only escalates into courtrooms, felony charges, a $175 million legal battle, and an IRS lien that put a number on exactly how far behind Mayweather's finances had fallen. The employees were the first ones to say something was wrong. The legal system was next. That transition from gym floor complaints to courthouse headlines is where Mayweather's condition stopped being just a workplace story and started becoming a legal one that would define his entire 2026. It's a pattern that echoes something Mayweather himself would eventually acknowledge, if not in the specific terms his employees used. When pressed publicly about his finances, he'd insist nothing had actually been lost, no properties seized, no lifestyle changed. "Nobody has taken none of my properties away from me," he said. I still got all my houses, I still got everything. That denial sat awkwardly next to the picture painted by his own former staff. Both things being true at once, a man who says he still owns everything, and a gym under his name that couldn't make payroll, is part of what makes this story so hard to pin down with a single headline. What's clear is that by the time Mayweather was making that denial, the employees had already spoken, the lawsuits had already been filed, and the pattern was already public. The rest of the story picks up exactly where that contradiction lives, inside the courtrooms where all of it eventually landed. If the gym walkout was the first crack, 2026 was the year the whole structure came apart in public. Court filings piled up fast, and reporters covering combat sports found themselves tracking felony charges, IRS liens, and lawsuits worth hundreds of millions, all tied to the same man. The clearest starting point is the felony case. Mayweather was charged over a luxury watch purchase that prosecutors said involved a bad check. Mayweather is facing 2 felony charges for passing a bad check to purchase a $200,000 watch in Las Vegas, per court filings. In late April, Clark County prosecutors filed a criminal complaint against Mayweather. According to ESPN, which broke the story Tuesday, the specific charges were laid out clearly in the complaint, giving the story a level of legal weight that gossip alone never carries. Mayweather was not present at his initial hearing Monday that officially charged him with theft, value $100,000 or greater, and draw or pass check with intent to defraud, value $1,200 or greater. The purchase itself traced back to late 2024, more than a year before the charges were filed, which meant this had been sitting somewhere in the legal pipeline for a long stretch before becoming public. The charges stem from a December 2024 purchase of a $200,000 Audemars Piguet watch from Gold and Beyond, a Las Vegas resale boutique. For a man whose entire persona revolved around having more money than he could spend, a felony charge over a bounced check for a watch was almost poetic in how directly it undercut the brand. It wasn't a rumor about excess. It was a criminal complaint over a specific transaction that allegedly didn't clear. Other outlets reporting on the case framed it the same way, not as an isolated incident, but as the latest entry in a mounting list of legal problems that had been building for months. Boxer Floyd Mayweather faces 2 felony charges in Las Vegas for theft and the intent to defraud, alleging he wrote a bad check to buy a watch he apparently couldn't cover at the time. Around the same period, the IRS entered the picture directly. Unpaid taxes going back years turned into a formal lien, adding a federal dimension to what had already become a sprawling legal mess. According to a recent report, the IRS has filed a $7.3 million lien against the undefeated former champion for unpaid taxes related to 2018 and 2023. Other reporting put the figure slightly higher, closer to $7.5 million, which suggests the exact number was still being worked out even as the story broke. Additionally, the IRS reportedly pursued him for $7.5 million in unpaid taxes, further compounding his financial woes. Either way, it was a multi-million-dollar problem tacked onto everything else. A tax lien of that size doesn't happen overnight. It reflects years of either non-payment or dispute with federal authorities, and it landed at almost the exact same time as the felony charges and a mounting pile of civil lawsuits. A convergence that made 2026 look less like a rough patch and more like a structural collapse for Mayweather's finances. Then came the lawsuit Mayweather himself filed, which in some ways was the most revealing document of all, because it was his own version of where the money had gone. He accused a former investment manager and real estate advisor of years of fraud. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is seeking $175 million in damages after filing a sweeping fraud lawsuit against his former investment manager and financial advisors, alleging years of financial misconduct involving real estate deals, jewelry, loans, and luxury assets. The scale of the alleged misconduct spanned multiple categories of Mayweather's fortune, not just cash but physical assets tied to his lifestyle. Mayweather filed a $175 million lawsuit against his former investment manager and real estate advisor, accusing them of fraud over several years. The former advisor named in that case, Jonah Richnitz, didn't stay quiet either. He pushed back publicly, arguing the real explanation for Mayweather's financial trouble had nothing to do with fraud at all. Richnitz has publicly denied those claims, arguing that Mayweather's financial issues stem from years of excessive spending. That back and forth, Mayweather blaming an advisor for stealing from him, the advisor blaming Mayweather's own spending habits, put two competing explanations for the same financial hole directly in front of the public. Both versions couldn't be fully true, but both were now part of the court record. On top of the Richnitz lawsuit, Mayweather was also chasing money from an old business relationship with a television network, alleging he'd been shortchanged on fight revenue for years. He is seeking $340 million from Showtime Networks over alleged misappropriation of fight earnings, and recently filed a $175 million fraud lawsuit against Richnitz, Frist Apex Ventures, and others, alleging they diverted funds from his real estate investments and business ventures without authorization. Two enormous lawsuits filed around the same period, both alleging Mayweather had been cheated out of money by people and institutions he'd trusted for years. If even part of either case held up, it would mean Mayweather's financial hole wasn't purely a spending problem. It was also a story about people close to him allegedly taking advantage. The legal chaos didn't stop at money disputes with advisors and networks either. It started reaching into his boxing schedule directly, canceling and delaying fights that were supposed to be his path back to solvency. A planned rematch against a legendary opponent got downgraded entirely. A planned rematch with Manny Pacquiao, initially set to be a major event in Las Vegas, was downgraded to an exhibition due to Mayweather's restructuring. Another highly anticipated fight against a heavyweight legend got pushed back too, for reasons that had nothing to do with Mayweather's own legal troubles this time. Around the same time, a potential exhibition match with heavyweight legend Mike Tyson was postponed to late 2026 after Tyson suffered a hand injury, delaying a much-needed financial boost for Mayweather. For a man depending on these bouts to help offset lawsuits, liens, and legal fees, watching two major paydays get delayed at almost the same time was its own kind of financial gut punch, regardless of who was ultimately at fault for each individual delay. The Zambides situation made things even messier. A planned exhibition in Greece against kickboxer Mike Zambides turned into a courtroom fight of its own, with a rival promotional company arguing Mayweather had broken an existing contract by agreeing to fight someone else first. A planned exhibition against Mike Zambides in Greece was canceled after CSI Sports Events sought an injunction, claiming Mayweather violated an exclusive promotional agreement. After receiving millions in advances tied to bouts with Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao, the dispute reached all the way to a federal judge just days before the fight was supposed to happen. Initially, Mayweather appeared to get a partial win. Floyd Mayweather has claimed a small win in court, as a federal judge has denied CSI Promotions' attempt to prevent his next exhibition bout. But that win didn't hold. A later ruling went the other way entirely, blocking the fight outright just before it was scheduled to happen. A judge has ruled against Floyd Mayweather and approved an injunction from CSI that will stop Mayweather from boxing Mike Zambides on Saturday night. That reversal, a win in court, followed almost immediately by a loss, captured the entire chaotic rhythm of Mayweather's 2026 legal calendar. Nothing stayed settled for long. Every apparent resolution seemed to get undone within days by a new filing, a new ruling, or a new complication. And the fallout from that one canceled fight rippled outward into everything else. The same dispute has since forced the postponement of the highly anticipated Mayweather-Pacquiao rematch. One contract dispute in Greece ended up delaying a completely separate marquee fight thousands of miles away, showing just how tangled Mayweather's business commitments had become. Boxing insiders following the schedule closely tracked the shifting dates in near real time, noting that even the internal legal team handling these disputes seemed to be working out details as they went. Pacquiao fight is not happening in September, Rafael tweeted. The lawyers said the date for Tyson exhibition is September 12 if they work things out with Floyd. On top of all the business litigation, Mayweather was also dealing with a deeply personal legal matter. A Nevada court ordered him to pay significant back child support after being declared the father of a young child following a paternity dispute. Floyd Mayweather Jr. has been ordered to pay $933,050 in back child support after a Nevada judge declared him the father of a 4-year-old girl in March. Other reporting rounded that figure differently, describing the case as centering on a broader dispute over paternity denial. His personal life also made headlines when he was ordered by a court to pay $1 million in child support, following his denial of paternity and refusal to undergo DNA testing. That case added a personal dimension to what had otherwise been a story about business fraud and unpaid taxes. It meant Mayweather was simultaneously fighting battles in family court, civil court, and criminal court. Three completely different legal arenas, all active at the same time, all tied to questions about money, responsibility, and honesty. Even his private jet usage became a legal flashpoint. A company alleged he hadn't paid for services rendered, adding yet another line item to the growing list of unpaid bills attached to his name. The undefeated legend has found himself tied to yet another lawsuit alleging an unpaid private jet bill. According to reports, Jet Set Aircraft Inc. pursued the claim through the courts like everyone else waiting on a check. By the middle of 2026, the list of active Mayweather legal issues read like a stack of case files rather than a single storyline. Felony charges, a tax lien, a child support order, a jet bill dispute, a $175 million fraud suit he filed, a $340 million suit against a network, and an injunction battle that killed one fight and delayed another. Contract disputes, felony charges, and a multi-million-dollar tax lien have thrown Floyd Mayweather's latest blockbuster fight into limbo. That density of legal activity, compressed into a matter of months, is what made 2026 feel different from every previous rough patch in Mayweather's career. This wasn't one scandal, it was an entire docket. Even people within combat sports who weren't directly involved started weighing in publicly, because the scale of it had become impossible to ignore. UFC's Dana White, when asked about it at a press conference, chose sympathy over judgment, acknowledging he'd spoken to Mayweather personally, but stopping short of drawing conclusions before the legal process played out. "Yeah, that's a tough one, and I've talked to him about it, but I don't know enough about it," White said. "You hear all these different stories. I think you have to wait to see how this thing's going to play out in court for him." White's framing was notable because it treated the situation as genuinely uncertain rather than settled, which reflected how tangled the competing claims and counterclaims had become by that point. Rather than pile on, he described wanting to see how things resolved before forming a firm opinion. Other boxing figures weren't as measured. Antonio Brown, never known for restraint online, took direct aim at Mayweather over the size of the Rich Nitz lawsuit, treating the legal battle as fresh material rather than a serious financial crisis. Antonio Brown has never been one to shy away from social media controversy, and his latest target is boxing legend Floyd Mayweather. That mix of reactions, sympathy from some corners of the sport, mockery from others, mirrored the split reaction from the public at large. Some people saw a legend getting taken advantage of by people he trusted. Others saw a cautionary tale about excess finally catching up with someone who'd spent decades bragging about exactly how much he could spend. Terence Crawford, freshly retired himself and dealing with his own transition away from boxing income, offered a version that split the difference. He acknowledged Mayweather's spending had gotten out ahead of his income, while pushing back on the idea that any of it meant Mayweather was actually broke. It's sad when you hear about the people that are coming at him and people calling him broke, which Floyd ain't going to never be broke. You may have $200 million and they call you broke, because you ain't at the status that you once were yesterday that you are today, Crawford told Helwani. Crawford went further, laying out the basic math problem underneath all of it. A lifestyle built for peak earning years that didn't automatically shrink once the earnings did. But Floyd has an expensive lifestyle, and if you're not bringing in money, just as much money as you're spending, then of course you're heading down the wrong path. That framing from Crawford is worth sitting with, because it lines up almost exactly with what Rich Nitz had argued in his own defense against the fraud lawsuit, that the real driver of Mayweather's financial trouble was spending, not theft. Two very different sources, on opposite sides of the dispute, converging on the same basic explanation. It also lines up with what the Elk Grove and Highland Avenue gym employees had been describing months earlier. A business with Mayweather's name on it that had run out of cash flow to cover basic operating costs, even while its owner remained one of the wealthiest athletes in history on paper. Put together, the picture that emerges isn't a man who lost his fortune to a single villain or a single bad decision. It's a man whose spending, business structure, and oversight all buckled at roughly the same time, producing a legal and financial mess that stretched from gym paychecks all the way up to federal tax authorities. By June, reporters tracking the situation described Mayweather as limping through the stretch, a word choice that captured just how unusual it was to see the label attached to someone with his career earnings. Mayweather is currently limping through another tough money patch. He's suing multiple former partners, alleging they stole hundreds of millions of dollars from him, and getting into trouble for non-payment, breach of contract, and writing bad checks. Even the framing of his upcoming fights shifted from pure spectacle to financial necessity. Analysts pointed out that a canceled exhibition against Zambides would have provided badly needed short-term cash, even if it wasn't a marquee event. No one cared about the Zambides fight, but it would have given Mayweather some much-needed liquidity to get through this line stretch. That's a strange sentence to write about a man once known for spending more on a single watch than most people make in years. But it's exactly the sentence that kept appearing across outlet after outlet throughout 2026. And it's why the story stopped being just about a gym parking lot and became a story about the entire financial structure underneath the Mayweather name. Looking at the CSI contract situation specifically shows how locked in Mayweather had become to a small set of promoters controlling his remaining marketable fights. For now, it seems Floyd Mayweather is tightly locked into the deal he signed with CSI. They want him to box Mike Tyson in September and Manny Pacquiao sometime in 2027. Analysts weren't shy about pointing out that these fights, whatever their sporting merit at this stage of both men's careers, still represented real money on the table if Mayweather simply followed through. Those fights may be way past their best before date, but they'll still generate interest and lots of money. If Mayweather can stop trying to shoot himself in both feet and just go ahead with those bouts, he could be laughing all the way to the bank within 12 months. But even that framing came with a question mark attached, because Mayweather's pattern throughout the ordeal had been to complicate rather than simplify his own path back to financial stability. Will he actually go ahead with them, though? Or will CSI have to drag him to court again over the millions they've already paid him? Adding to his growing list of bad debts, there's also a separate lawsuit worth noting that showed up in the reporting, tied to another figure in boxing entirely. A reminder that this financial hole had actual dollar figures owed to specific people, not just abstract fraud allegations. Is Floyd Mayweather broke? Money booked 3 fights for 2026 and still owes Logan Paul $1.5 million. That detail alone tells you something about the scale of the debts piling up. Not just IRS liens and legal fees, but personal debts to other athletes that had apparently gone unresolved for a stretch of time. It's a small line in the coverage, but it fits the larger pattern of Mayweather's finances stretched thin across dozens of separate obligations at once. And that pattern of scattered, unresolved debts is exactly what made Mayweather's own public denials so striking when they finally came. He wasn't just answering one question about one lawsuit. He was trying to push back against an entire ecosystem of claims that had built up around him over the course of a single, brutal year. Mayweather's own response to the felony charges leaned into defiance rather than concern, treating the mounting headlines almost as fuel rather than crisis. Floyd Mayweather responds to felony charges reports, "Keep the press coming." The boxing legend has spoken out after reports linked him to felony allegations involving a bad check used to buy a luxury watch. That posture, inviting more scrutiny rather than shrinking from it, became something of a signature for how Mayweather chose to handle the entire stretch of legal trouble. Where other public figures might go quiet during felony proceedings, Mayweather lined into his old showman instincts, treating the coverage as attention rather than threat. It set the stage for the interview that would follow weeks later, where Mayweather sat down and addressed the financial rumors directly on his own terms, choosing a hip-hop podcast rather than a courtroom or a financial reporter as the venue to make his case. That interview and the surrounding reactions from people across the boxing and entertainment world form the next part of this story. Because while the courts were sorting through lawsuits and liens, Mayweather himself was doing what he'd always done best, going in front of a camera and telling his own version of events. Whether that version matched what his gym employees, his former advisor. And the paper trail of lawsuits we're describing is a separate question. But it's one worth exploring, because the contrast between Mayweather's public denials and the documented financial mess around him is central to understanding his actual condition heading into the back half of 2026. That's where the story goes next, into the family history of head trauma and memory loss that Mayweather has talked about surprisingly openly, and into his own denials about the state of his empire. Long before the gym walkout, long before the felony charges, Mayweather was already talking publicly about a different kind of condition, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with what boxing does to the body over a lifetime. And the person he talked about most was his uncle Roger. Roger Mayweather wasn't just family. He was Floyd's head trainer for most of his career, the man in his corner during his biggest fights. Watching him decline became, by Floyd's own account, one of the reasons he stepped away from the sport in the first place. Mayweather believes that the years his uncle spent in the ring being banged on the head left him with memory loss and a serious case of unmanaged diabetes. The string of health problems that plague Roger helped influence Mayweather's decision to retire from the sport. The details Floyd shared weren't vague either. He described a man in his 50s who seemed decades older, a description that stuck with people who followed the story. It's sad that he's only in his 50s, but it seems like he's an old man in his 80s from the sport of boxing. Mayweather says in a video posted by Fight Hype, "Boxing is wear and tear on the body. My Uncle Roger, I love him dearly, and it hurts me badly that he doesn't even know who I am anymore." That last line is worth sitting with. A nephew saying his own uncle, the man who trained him for most of his career, no longer recognized him. That's not a distant family health rumor. That's Floyd Mayweather, in his own words, describing what boxing's long-term damage looked like up close, inside his own family, years before any of the financial chaos began. Other accounts from around that same period confirmed the severity of what Floyd was describing. People who followed the family closely said Roger's decline had been visible and ongoing for years. Well before Floyd spoke about it publicly, everyone knows Roger has brain damage. He has had obvious issues for years now. Floyd had said for years how his uncle's health has been declining, and how Roger sometimes wanders around without knowing where he's going. The wandering wasn't a minor detail either. It reportedly happened at real distances, requiring people to actively search for him. They've been finding Roger 10 to 20 miles from his home for years now. That's the kind of detail that turns a general statement about memory issues into something much more concrete and much more serious. Roger's story eventually reached its end. He passed away in 2020, after years of visible decline that Floyd had been describing publicly for years before that. Roger, who was his nephew's trainer for most of Mayweather Jr.'s career, died in 2020, leaving his two brothers and nephews to represent the family's name. But Roger wasn't the only Mayweather family member Floyd would eventually describe as struggling with memory. His father, Floyd Mayweather Sr., trained him during his childhood and much of his early professional career, and had his own separate health complications tied to boxing. His fighting career was impacted by sarcoidosis, a lung disease that contributed to his transition to training. Sarcoidosis wasn't just an inconvenience for Mayweather Sr. It was a serious, painful, ongoing condition that he described in his own words as something that touched nearly every part of his body. "This disease I got is serious, man. It attacks every organ in your body, and sometimes I have my good days, and then other days are bad," Mayweather Sr. told Fight Hype. He said he has sarcoidosis, which according to the Mayo Clinic, causes the growth of tiny collections of inflammatory cells, granulomas, in any part of your body, most commonly the lungs and lymph nodes. He described specific episodes of the disease flaring up without warning, turning an ordinary night out into a medical emergency. "I was at the club on Saturday night, and I felt fine," Mayweather Sr. explained. "Right when the show was ending, man, I got a pain in my ribs and I was like, damn. I couldn't even walk, man. I got out to my car, and I drove about 3 to 4 yards and had to put it in park." That's a man describing being physically unable to drive because of sudden, disabling pain. A stark contrast to the image of the sharp, defensively brilliant trainer who'd shaped his son's technique for years. It's a reminder that the Mayweather family's health story was never just about memory loss. It included physical breakdowns that had nothing to do with the brain at all. And then layered on top of the lung condition came the memory issues too. In 2024, Floyd went public about his father's cognitive decline in the most personal way possible, through a video of an ordinary family moment. In 2024, his son Floyd Mayweather Jr. publicly stated that his father is dealing with dementia, while emphasizing enjoyment of family moments, such as helping his great-grandson get dressed and singing to him. The video itself showed something small and tender: a grandfather helping a toddler into pajamas, singing while he did it. Seuss pajamas, meticulously making sure the youngest Mayweather gets his arms in the sleeves correctly. As he dresses the little boxer, he warbles a few runs with his voice of gold and assures the toddler that he got him. The video shows two distant generations of boxers in one sacred and tender moment out of the ring. Floyd's caption made clear exactly what he wanted people to take from it. Not pity, but appreciation for the moment itself, dementia and all. The champ wrote in the caption of the video, "Even though my dad is dealing with dementia, he is still a great man, and I enjoy these priceless moments." Dressing and singing to his great-grandson was amazing. That framing mattered because it wasn't a story about tragedy overwhelming the family. It was Floyd choosing to show his father still functioning, still present, still capable of tender moments even while dealing with a diagnosis that scares most families into silence. The public reaction wasn't uniformly gentle, though. Some people expressed surprise that a second member of the Mayweather family was dealing with cognitive decline after Roger's well-documented struggles. "Damn, Floyd Mayweather's dad has dementia too," one person tweeted. That reaction, blunt as it was, captured something real. This wasn't an isolated case within the family anymore. It was a second generation, a second Mayweather, dealing with the same category of illness that had already taken Roger's life. For a family whose entire legacy is built on boxing, that pattern is hard to ignore. Floyd Sr.'s condition reportedly wasn't as advanced as Roger's had been in his final years, according to people who knew both men, but it was still described as gradually worsening. His father is punchy, but he is mentally sharper, although his dad is younger than Roger and has been getting a bit worse in recent years. Floyd Sr.'s career had its own physical toll story too, separate from the sarcoidosis and separate from the memory concerns. An old, violent family incident had cut his boxing career short decades earlier. Mayweather Sr.'s days in the ring were prematurely cut short after his brother shot him in the leg while he was holding his son. He attempted a post-recovery comeback, but eventually quit boxing to concentrate on his up-and-coming offspring's career instead. That's an extraordinary detail. Floyd Sr. carrying a permanent scar from being shot by his own brother, an incident that reshaped the entire family's trajectory and pushed him toward training his son full-time instead of competing himself. Mayweather Sr. has a colossal scar that remains to forever remind him of that fateful day. Despite the injury and despite everything that came after, Mayweather Sr. eventually returned to Floyd's corner as his trainer for some of the biggest fights of his son's career, including the bout against Manny Pacquiao. Sr. returned as Floyd Jr.'s trainer in May 2013, ahead of his fight against Robert Guerrero due to Roger's health issues, and has remained in that role for subsequent major bouts, including Floyd Jr.'s victory over Manny Pacquiao in 2015. That timeline matters because it means Floyd Sr. stepped back into the corner, specifically because Roger's health had deteriorated too much to continue. One family member's decline directly created the opening for another family member's return, a strange, sad kind of succession within the same boxing dynasty. It also means that by the time Floyd Jr. was talking publicly about his father's memory issues in 2024, he'd already lived through watching that exact same decline happened to Roger years earlier. He wasn't speculating about what memory loss looks like in a boxing family. He'd already lived through it once and was now watching it happen again with his father. That repetition is exactly what Floyd himself pointed to when explaining his own approach to protecting his mental health going forward. A family pattern he was determined to try to interrupt for himself, even if he couldn't stop it in the generation before him. Floyd's own comments about memory loss became more frequent and more specific over time, moving from general concern about the sport to direct statements about his own cognitive state. He described noticing changes in himself, framed carefully but honestly. The memory loss could be from boxing, or it could be something that runs in the family. For example, my uncle Roger Mayweather, it got really bad for him, so I ended up hiring someone to take care of him. And the same thing is happening to my dad, Floyd Sr. It might be something genetic in the family. Even I feel that mentally, I'm not 100% like before. I like to do different exercises, puzzles, word games to keep my mind healthy, Floyd Mayweather Jr. said. That's a fighter with a perfect record. Someone who avoided more punishment than almost anyone in the sport's history. Because of his defensive style, still acknowledging he doesn't feel entirely like his old self mentally. For a man whose entire brand was built on invincibility, that kind of admission stood out. He went further in a separate interview, tying the pattern across 3 generations of his own family together explicitly, and framing his own situation as simply the latest link in that chain. Having dealt with the loss of his grandmother and uncle due to deteriorating memory and his father, who is currently experiencing it, Mayweather didn't leave it off the table for himself. My grandmother died from it, my uncle Roger died from it. My daddy's going through it, so I'm only human. So if I can have a little memory loss, it's possible. Notice the specific language there, 3 generations before him, all touched by the same category of decline, a grandmother, an uncle, and now a father. Floyd was essentially describing a family pattern that predates his own boxing career entirely, which complicates the simple story that boxing alone is the cause. He'd made that exact point himself, years earlier, when discussing Roger's decline. He didn't rule out genetics as a factor even then, acknowledging some uncertainty about how much of it traced to blows taken in the ring versus something inherited. But doctors don't know how the illness progresses. That uncertainty is echoed by researchers who study the science behind these conditions too. Experts who study head trauma have pointed out that repeated blows, even without visible concussion symptoms, can disrupt sleep patterns in ways that damage the brain over time. After you've sustained repeated blows to the head, whether or not there are symptoms of a concussion, this can disrupt your sleep patterns. A disrupted sleep cycle has been linked with impairment of the protein called tau, which is essential to normal neuron function. This, in turn, can lead to the formation of tangles in the brain that accumulate and eventually disrupt all the communication between your neurons, Langford says. That scientific explanation adds real weight to what Floyd had been describing informally about his own family for years. Tau protein tangles, disrupted sleep, communication breakdown between neurons. These aren't just vague concepts. They're documented mechanisms tied specifically to the kind of repeated head trauma boxing produces over a long career. And the symptoms tied to that kind of damage go well beyond memory. Researchers describe a wide range of potential effects that touch nearly every part of someone's daily functioning. The condition may trigger cognitive, behavioral, and mental issues, such as difficulty thinking, impulsive behavior, depression, or apathy, short-term memory loss, emotional instability, substance abuse, and suicidal thoughts and actions, among other problems. That's a sobering list to read next to a family that includes multiple people who spent decades absorbing blows to the head as part of their profession. It's also worth noting that some voices in the broader combat sports conversation have pushed back on the idea that fights themselves are the main culprit, pointing instead to the cumulative effect of daily training and sparring sessions that rarely make headlines. The brain damage doesn't come from the pro fights in boxing, it comes from training. That distinction matters for how you think about Mayweather's own risk profile specifically. His defensive style, built around avoiding punishment rather than absorbing it, was famous throughout his career, a big part of why he finished 50-0 without much visible facial damage. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is known for his formidable physique. Because of his ability to duck and dodge punches, the boxer hasn't taken many hits to the face. Even with that defensive shell, though, sparring sessions over a multi-decade career still represent an enormous cumulative volume of exposure, which lines up with why Floyd himself has said he doesn't feel entirely like his old self mentally, despite avoiding the kind of visible damage that plagued Roger and his father. That's the paradox sitting at the center of this part of the story. A fighter whose defense was so good it became legendary, still describing memory concerns in himself, still watching 2 family members go through severe decline, and still choosing to talk about all of it publicly, rather than keep it private the way many athletes do. Floyd's response to all of it wasn't retreat, it was protection through action. He described actively hiring caretakers for family members as their conditions worsened, treating it as both a financial responsibility and an emotional one. For example, my uncle Roger Mayweather, it got really bad for him, so I ended up hiring someone to take care of him. And the same thing is happening to my dad, Floyd Sr. That's a detail that connects directly back to the earlier part of this story. A man capable of spending $200,000 on a single watch, allegedly with a check that didn't clear, while simultaneously funding round-the-clock care for family members dealing with severe cognitive decline. Both things happening in the same life, at overlapping points in time. He also framed his own accumulated wealth explicitly as insurance against whatever might happen to his own mind down the road, treating the money not as an end in itself, but as protection for a future he's clearly thought seriously about. I built generational wealth for my children and my family, so if I am going through that, they're going to make sure that I am okay. That statement puts the entire financial saga from earlier in this story in a different light. Every lawsuit, every dollar chased in court, every dispute over an advisor's alleged fraud, all of it connects back to a man who has said, in his own words, that the money exists specifically to make sure his family can take care of him. If his own mind starts slipping the way his uncles and fathers did. Seen that way, the felony charges over a bounced check and the $175 million fraud lawsuit against a former advisor aren't separate from the memory story, they're deeply tied to it. If Mayweather genuinely believes his fortune is the thing standing between him and an unprotected decline, then every dollar allegedly lost to fraud, mismanagement, or unpaid wages becomes part of the same fight. That's the through line connecting the gym walkout, the courtroom battles, and the family health story together. It's not three separate narratives. It's one man's finances, his family's medical history, and his own stated fears about his future, all colliding at the same point in time. There's also a broader context worth including here, the larger debate within combat sports about whether boxing is even more dangerous than other combat disciplines. A conversation Floyd himself has weighed in on given his own family's experience with the sport's aftermath. At press time, speculation continues to swirl about whether Floyd Mayweather will re-emerge from retirement to fight mixed martial arts (MMA) fighter and reigning Ultimate Fighting Championship lightweight champ Conor McGregor. The buzz about this matchup has sparked intermittent flare-ups of trash talk between these two athletes and generated animated conversations among fans about which sport is more dangerous. The answer: the combat sports are equally perilous, albeit in different ways, according to findings reported in the New York Times. Despite everything he'd witnessed inside his own family, Floyd never became an advocate for banning the sport. That built his fortune and, by his own account, damaged the people closest to him. He framed boxing instead as an opportunity, particularly for people without other paths available to them. It's an important sport that gives opportunity to young men, and now even women, who come from disadvantaged communities to find a way out, he says. That position, acknowledging the damage while still defending the opportunity, is consistent with almost everything else Floyd has said about his family's health story. He doesn't hide from the cost. He just insists the trade was still worth it, for him and for the people who might follow his paths. By his own account, Floyd tried to maintain a lifestyle specifically designed to protect whatever health he had left, avoiding the substances that might compound whatever risk boxing had already introduced. "I don't drink, smoke, or do drugs," he says, "so I have the same strength I did during boxing not to abuse my health or wellness, and to live as long as I can." That statement, made years before the felony charges and lawsuits of 2026, shows a man who had already been thinking carefully about longevity long before his finances became a public spectacle. Whatever else was happening with his money, his approach to his own physical health seemed to remain consistent and deliberate. It's a detail that adds nuance to the picture his employees and legal disputes painted later. The financial chaos of 2026 wasn't necessarily a sign of someone who'd lost his grip entirely. It existed alongside a man who, by his own repeated public statements, was still actively trying to protect his mind and body against the very decline he'd watched destroy two members of his own family. That combination, careful about his own health habits, chaotic about his business affairs, is one of the more surprising threads running through this entire story. It suggests Mayweather's condition, in the fullest sense of the word, his employees and family history point toward, isn't a single simple diagnosis. It's several overlapping conditions at once. There's the financial condition, his gym staff, described in a parking lot protest. There's the legal condition documented across felony charges, tax liens, and multi-million-dollar lawsuits. And there's the family health condition Floyd himself has spoken about with unusual openness, tracing a pattern across 3 generations of people who gave their bodies to the same sport. Understanding any one of those threads in isolation gives an incomplete picture. Understanding all 3 together is what actually explains why Floyd Mayweather, at this stage of his life, looks the way he does to the people watching from the outside, and why the people closest to him, from gym coaches to family members, have started describing that reality in their own words. That family pattern also explains something about Floyd's own tone whenever health questions come up in interviews. He doesn't get defensive the way he does about money. He talks about it almost matter-of-factly, treating memory loss as an eventual likelihood, rather than a frightening unknown, because he's already watched it happen twice up close. That contrast, calm about the health questions, combative about the financial ones, says something about where Floyd feels most exposed. Money is the identity he built his entire public persona around. Memory loss is something he's already made peace with as a family inevitability. Something wealth is meant to soften rather than prevent entirely. Which brings the story to its next turn, how Floyd has chosen to respond, publicly and repeatedly, to every version of the crisis narrative building around him. From denying he's broke to inviting more press coverage of his felony case, his response pattern reveals as much about his real condition as any lawsuit or employee protest ever could. Faced with a year's worth of lawsuits, felony charges, IRS liens, and employees speaking out about unpaid wages, Mayweather didn't go quiet. He did what he's always done, sat down for an interview and addressed it head-on, on a platform where he controlled the framing. The setting was a conversation with rapper Cam'ron on the show It Is What It Is, where the topic of his finances came up directly rather than through a filtered press release. Floyd Mayweather is pushing back against the persistent rumors surrounding his finances. During an interview with Cam'ron on It Is What It Is, the undefeated boxing legend addressed speculation that his recent exhibition bouts and business moves are a result of financial trouble. Cam'ron didn't soften the question either, asking Mayweather point-blank whether the recent flurry of exhibition fights and business activity was a sign of financial desperation rather than genuine ambition. Cam'ron asked Mayweather directly whether his recent activity in and around them was driven by money or simply part of continuing his career. Mayweather's answer was immediate and unambiguous. He insisted nothing tangible had actually changed about his lifestyle or holdings, despite everything playing out in courtrooms. "Nobody has taken none of my properties away from me," he said. "I still got all my houses, I still got everything." He extended that denial to cover the people around him too, framing himself not just as financially stable, but as still the primary provider for an entire extended circle of family and staff. "My mother, my whole family, their bills are still paid, still pay all my employees," he said. That last line stands in direct tension with everything documented earlier. The gym walkout, the signs reading modern-day slavery, the general manager describing inherited chaos on her first day. 2 versions of the same reality, sitting directly next to each other in the public record. Text. Mayweather went on to frame the entire wave of negative coverage as jealousy rather than legitimate concern, suggesting people wanted to see him fail simply because of how much he'd already won. "After they go home and they got everything they won, they're preying on my downfall," Mayweather said. "We don't want to see Floyd win nothing." He addressed the lawsuits specifically too, arguing that his fame made him a target regardless of the actual facts underlying each individual case. The 50-0 boxing icon also addressed the lawsuits and controversies that have fueled recent headlines, suggesting his name attracts scrutiny because of his celebrity status. "It's this lawsuit, it's that lawsuit," he said. "I get myself out of the situation. It's not me, I'm the biggest name. Who they gone point the finger at." That's a notable rhetorical move, reframing an entire year of felony charges, tax liens, and civil suits as simply a byproduct of being famous, rather than addressing any of the specific allegations on their individual merits. It's consistent with how he's approached controversy for most of his career. He also described a deliberate strategy of disengaging from the online conversation entirely, framing his focus as long-term wealth building rather than short-term reputation management. Mayweather went on to reveal that he intentionally distances himself from much of the online conversation. "I ain't got social media on my phone," he said. "I'm too focused on building generational wealth." That comment ties directly back to what he'd said elsewhere about the actual purpose of his fortune: protection for his family, insurance against the same decline that had taken Roger and was affecting his father. Even in a moment of pure financial defense, the health thread kept reappearing underneath the surface of his answers. The interview closed with Mayweather offering a blunt, confident message to anyone still doubting his financial standing, treating the entire controversy as noise that would eventually pass, the same way it always had before. That confidence, whether justified or not, was consistent with the way he'd handled every previous controversy across a 3-decade public career. But that confident interview came at almost the exact same moment other headlines were describing a very different picture. A man facing felony charges, an IRS lien, a fraud lawsuit, and gym employees describing missing paychecks. The timing of the denial, landing squarely in the middle of that storm, is part of what made it feel less like a resolution and more like one more data point in an ongoing dispute. That tension didn't go unnoticed by reporters covering the story either. Multiple outlets ran the interview alongside recaps of the same legal troubles Mayweather was downplaying, letting readers draw their own conclusions about which version to believe. The comments come after months of speculation surrounding Mayweather's finances following reports of legal disputes and canceled exhibition fights. That juxtaposition, Mayweather saying he still has everything, right next to headlines about liens and lawsuits, became the defining tension of his public image throughout 2026. Not a single dramatic collapse, but a constant back and forth between his own confident denials and a steady drip of documented legal and financial trouble. Mayweather's response to the felony charges specifically followed that same pattern of defiant confidence rather than concern. Rather than going quiet during a criminal proceeding, he leaned into the attention. Floyd Mayweather responds to felony charges reports, "Keep the press coming." The boxing legend has spoken out after reports linked him to felony allegations involving a bad check used to buy a luxury watch. That phrase, "keep the press coming," is worth sitting with. Most people facing felony charges try to minimize media attention. Mayweather, treating the entire ordeal as another form of promotion, invited more of it, consistent with a career built on turning controversy into content. It's a strategy that's worked for him before. Decades of trash talk, provocative interviews, and manufactured rivalries helped build the pay-per-view numbers that made him the highest-paid athlete of his era. Applying that same playbook to felony charges and financial collapse headlines was a gamble. But it was a gamble entirely consistent with everything Mayweather had done publicly for 30 years. Other voices in his orbit offered a gentler read on the same situation. Dana White's comments captured a middle ground between the two extremes, not dismissing the seriousness of the charges, but also not writing Mayweather off before the legal process concluded. During a June 28 press conference, White was asked about the string of headlines surrounding Floyd Mayweather, including his recent $175 million fraud lawsuit against former advisor Jonah Richnitz, and reports alleging the boxer has lost a substantial portion of his fortune. White acknowledged he has spoken with Mayweather, but said he's waiting for the legal process to play out before drawing conclusions. White went further, describing sympathy for a man who'd built one of the largest fortunes in combat sports history, even while acknowledging the scale of what he was currently facing. Rather than criticize Mayweather, White expressed sympathy for someone who built one of the biggest fortunes in combat sports. That sympathy, combined with White's openness to potentially working with Mayweather again in the future, suggested that at least some corners of the combat sports industry weren't ready to write off Mayweather's career or his standing, regardless of the headlines piling up around him. Crawford's earlier comments deserve a second look in this context too, because they weren't purely critical. They came from a place of genuine familiarity with what happens to a fighter's finances the moment the ring paydays stop. Having recently retired himself, Crawford understood the specific math problem better than most outside observers could. His broader point wasn't that Mayweather was reckless or foolish. It was that any high earner, no matter how disciplined, faces a brutal transition. Once the income that funded a certain lifestyle disappears or slows down. That's a more sympathetic framing than most of the online commentary Mayweather was receiving during the same stretch. It's also a framing that lines up with what Richnitz argued in his own defense against the fraud lawsuit, and what employees at the gym seemed to be describing indirectly too. A business empire that had scaled up around an assumption of continuous, massive cash flow, and struggled the moment that assumption stopped holding true. Not every reaction was measured, though. Antonio Brown's public mockery represented the opposite end of the spectrum, treating Mayweather's mounting legal troubles as pure entertainment rather than a serious situation deserving any nuance at all. Antonio Brown has never been one to shy away from social media controversy, and his latest target is boxing legend Floyd Mayweather. That split reaction, genuine sympathy from figures like White and Crawford, open mockery from figures like Brown, reflects how divided public opinion had become by mid-2026. There was no single consensus narrative about what was actually happening to Mayweather. There were competing versions, each backed by different pieces of evidence, each amplified by different corners of the sports media ecosystem. That division extended into the boxing business world too. Jake Paul, weighing in on the delayed Pacquiao rematch, took aim at a different target entirely: the culture of ego within boxing itself, framing Mayweather's situation as symptomatic of a larger problem, rather than a personal failing unique to him. Jake Paul slams egos in boxing and blames them for delay in Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. As the Floyd Mayweather bout against Manny Pacquiao gets cloudier, Jake Paul has taken a firm stance on what's holding the fight back. Manny Pacquiao himself, the man on the other side of the delayed rematch, also spoke publicly about the postponement, adding yet another voice to the growing chorus of people commenting on Mayweather's situation from the outside. That fight, once one of the biggest rivalries in boxing history, had become entangled in the exact same legal mess consuming everything else in Mayweather's world. The sheer number of people weighing in, fellow boxers, promoters, rival fighters, UFC executives, is itself a data point about how significant this story had become within combat sports circles by mid-2026. This wasn't a niche financial story confined to legal trade publications. It had become one of the defining storylines in the sport that year. And through all of it, Mayweather kept talking. Every denial, every defiant statement, every keep the press coming moment added another layer to the public record, giving outside observers plenty of his own words to weigh against the documents piling up in court. What's striking, looking back across all these statements together, is how consistent Mayweather's tone remained regardless of which specific allegation he was addressing. Whether it was the felony charges, the broke rumors, or the fraud lawsuit against his former advisor, his public posture stayed the same: confident, dismissive of critics, and unwilling to concede that anything had fundamentally changed. That consistency is its own kind of evidence about his real condition, separate from anything a lawsuit or an employee protest could reveal. It shows a man whose public identity remains locked into the same persona he built over 3 decades. Unbothered, in control, always winning, even while the paperwork around him told a messier, more complicated story. Whether that persona reflects genuine confidence or a refusal to publicly process what's actually happening is something only Mayweather himself truly knows. But the pattern across every interview, every quote, and every defiant statement points in the same direction: a man determined to control the story his own way, no matter what his employees, his advisors, or the courts were saying about him at the same time. That determination extends to how he's talked about his boxing future too. Even amid all the legal chaos, Mayweather kept floating the idea of stepping back into a professional ring, something that would have seemed unthinkable for most fighters dealing with felony charges and multiple lawsuits at once. The 48-year-old fighter, who retired with a perfect 50-0 record in 2017, has hinted at the possibility of stepping back into the ring for an official bout, following a series of exhibition matches. Floyd Mayweather, the undefeated boxing legend, has sparked speculation about a potential return to professional boxing in 2026. That kind of return would put his most valuable remaining asset, the undefeated record itself, directly at risk. A professional fight would put his undefeated 50-0 record at risk. For a man in the middle of a financial and legal storm, risking the one thing that still cements his legacy, regardless of everything else happening around him, is a decision that says something about how he's weighing risk versus reward at this stage of his life. Even Mike Tyson, the man reportedly lined up as his next opponent, expressed surprise that Mayweather wanted the fight at all, citing legitimate safety concerns given the physical mismatch between them. Tyson himself has expressed surprise at Mayweather's desire to face him, citing the considerable size difference and warning of potential health risks for his opponent. That detail circles back to everything discussed earlier about the family health pattern. Here's a fighter who has spoken openly about memory concerns, who watched two family members decline from repeated blows to the head, reportedly still considering stepping into the ring against a much larger opponent, seemingly driven by financial pressure rather than pure sporting ambition. It's a decision that puts every earlier thread of this story in direct conversation with each other. The money troubles that could be eased by fight paydays. The family health history that makes any additional head trauma a genuinely serious risk. And the public persona that refuses to acknowledge vulnerability on any front, whether financial or physical. That collision of factors, need for money, risk to health, refusal to show weakness, is arguably the clearest single window into Mayweather's actual condition available right now. Not one clean diagnosis, but three separate pressures pushing against each other inside the same person, all playing out in public at the same time. Mayweather's team, for their part, hasn't stayed entirely silent either. Statements attributed to his representatives have followed the same broad pattern as his own comments, treating each individual allegation as separate, manageable, and not indicative of any larger crisis. This has been updated with a statement from Mayweather's attorney. That legal response pattern, addressing each case individually rather than acknowledging any pattern across them, mirrors Mayweather's own personal approach in interviews. Compartmentalize each fire, put it out, move to the next one, and never step back to address the totality of what's happening all at once. Whether that strategy holds up long-term is an open question. Legal proceedings tend to eventually force exactly the kind of comprehensive reckoning that Mayweather's public statements have avoided so far. A moment where all the separate pieces get weighed together, rather than addressed one at a time in front of a friendly interviewer. That moment hasn't fully arrived yet, and that's part of what makes this story still unfolding rather than finished. Court dates for the felony case, resolution of the fraud lawsuit, the fate of the delayed Tyson and Pacquiao fights. All of it remains genuinely uncertain as of now, which is unusual for a public figure whose career has otherwise been defined by absolute control over his own narrative. That uncertainty is itself a kind of answer to the question this story set out to examine. The condition Mayweather's employees have described: financial disorder, missed paychecks, a business running on fumes despite a billion-dollar career behind it, sits directly alongside the condition Mayweather himself has described in his own family: memory loss, genetic risk, and a fortune built explicitly as insurance against decline. Both conditions are real. Both are documented in employee testimony, in court filings, and in Mayweather's own words across multiple interviews spanning years. Neither one erases the other. Together, they form the fuller picture of where Floyd Mayweather actually stands right now. A picture his own employees, his own family, and his own mouth have all helped put together, piece by piece, in public. That's ultimately what makes this story different from a typical celebrity finance scandal or a typical athlete health story. It's both at once, tangled together by the same man's decisions, the same family's history, and the same year's worth of headlines. The gym coaches describing unpaid wages and the family members describing memory loss aren't telling two different stories about Floyd Mayweather. They're describing two sides of the exact same man at the exact same moment in his life. Whatever happens with the felony case, the fraud lawsuit, or the rescheduled fights against Tyson and Pacquiao, that dual condition isn't going away quickly. The financial hole took years to dig and will take time to climb out of, if it happens at all. The family health pattern, by Floyd's own account, isn't something money can cure, only something money might help manage. What's left is a man in his late 40s, sitting at the intersection of both stories, doing what he's always done in public, talking, denying, defying, and insisting that everything is still fine, even while the people closest to him keep describing something more complicated underneath. By mid-2026, the picture around Mayweather had settled into an uneasy holding pattern. The felony case remained active. The fraud lawsuit against his former advisor was still working through the courts. And the exhibition circuit, that once seemed like an easy path back to financial stability, kept hitting delay after delay. The Tyson fight, once framed as the clearest path to fast money, remained tentatively scheduled for the fall, still dependent on lawyers working out the surrounding contract disputes, tied to the CSI injunction fight. The lawyers said the date for Tyson exhibition is September 12 if they work things out with Floyd. The Pacquiao rematch, once billed as a major Las Vegas event, had been pushed even further out, tentatively into the following year. Pacquiao would be moved to January if it happens. Even Mayweather's earlier hints at an actual professional comeback, not just exhibitions, remained unresolved, floating out there as a possibility that could either solve his financial pressures in one shot, or add yet another risk to an already crowded plate of legal and physical concerns. Meanwhile, the gym employees who first raised the alarm haven't disappeared from the story either. Their walkout became the reference point every subsequent piece of Mayweather financial news gets measured against, cited repeatedly whenever a new lawsuit or lien surfaces as evidence that the pattern didn't start with the felony charges. It started with people who couldn't get their paychecks on time. Some of those employees are still owed money, still navigating a legal system that gives them real leverage under California labor law, but requires patience and persistence to actually collect. The general manager who described inheriting chaos on her first day, the coach whose wife ended up in the hospital from stress, the staff members instructed not to tell Mayweather his own gym might close. All of them are still out there, living with the consequences of a business that carried a billionaire's name but couldn't cover its own bills. That's the part of this story that rarely gets the same attention as felony charges or nine-figure lawsuits. But it might be the most honest measurement of Mayweather's actual condition available. Not the number in a court filing, but the lived experience of the people who worked closest to his brand, describing in their own words what it felt like to be on the other side of it. On the family side, there's no dramatic resolution either, because there isn't one to have. Floyd Sr. continues managing both his sarcoidosis and his memory issues, according to the accounts Floyd Jr. has shared. Still present enough to take part in family moments like helping his great-grandson get dressed, even as his condition gradually progresses. Roger's story already reached its conclusion in 2020, standing as the clearest example within the family of where this pattern eventually leads if left unaddressed. Floyd Jr. himself continues describing his own mental state in the same measured, matter-of-fact way he always has, acknowledging he doesn't feel entirely like his old self, doing puzzles and word games to try to keep his mind sharp. Treating memory loss as a family inevitability, he's made a kind of peace with rather than something he's actively fighting to deny. That peace with the health side of his life stands in sharp contrast to how combative he remains about the financial side. He'll acknowledge calmly that his memory might decline the same way his father's and uncle's did. He won't acknowledge, under any circumstance, that his business empire is anything other than fully intact. That contradiction is, in the end, the clearest answer this story can offer about Mayweather's real condition. It's not one thing. It's a financial structure that his own employees describe as broken in places, running alongside a public persona that insists nothing has changed. It's a family health history that Mayweather discusses with unusual honesty, sitting next to a refusal to discuss his finances with anywhere near that same level of candor. Both things are documented. Both things came directly from people who know him best. The gym staff who worked under his name, the family members whose decline he's described in his own words, and Mayweather himself, across dozens of interviews spanning years, sometimes contradicting his own previous statements without seeming to notice the tension. What his employees have described, in parking lot protests and on-record interviews, isn't a man who's lost everything. It's a man whose empire has visible cracks in it, whose family has a documented pattern of cognitive decline stretching back 3 generations, and whose own public response to all of it has been to talk his way through it the same way he's talked his way through every challenge across a 30-year career. Defiant, unwavering, and utterly convinced that whatever comes next, he'll still be standing at the end of it. Whether that confidence is justified is still an open question, one that court dates, fight cards, and the slow progression of a family health pattern will keep answering in real time over the coming months. The felony case will resolve one way or another. The fraud lawsuit will eventually reach a verdict or a settlement. The Tyson and Pacquiao fights will either happen or they won't. But the deeper story, the one his employees started telling in a gym parking lot, the one his family has been living with for 3 generations, the one Mayweather himself keeps narrating in his own voice across every interview, isn't the kind of thing that resolves on a court date. It's ongoing, ordinary, and human, playing out one paycheck, one diagnosis, and one defiant interview at a time. That's the real condition his employees, his family, and his own words have finally put into focus. Not a single crisis with a clean ending, but a man carrying several unresolved conditions at once. Still talking, still fighting, and still insisting, against a growing pile of evidence to the contrary, that he's exactly as fine as he's always claimed to be. Sources: the manual Terrence Crawford on Mayweather's money woes. Real Health slipping punches. Grokkipedia Floyd Mayweather Sr. Complex Dana White on Mayweather's financial problems. Complex Mayweather denies broke rumors. Yahoo Sports Dana White on Mayweather's money troubles. Fox Sports Floyd Mayweather Jr. news and rumors. MMA Mania is Floyd Mayweather broke. Yardbarker Floyd Mayweather Jr. news. SportsGrid Mayweather's 2026 legal battles and financial woes. TWSN Mayweather hints at boxing comeback. CBS News Floyd Mayweather tag. Sportico Mayweather bad check case. HR Grapevine Mayweather gym employees protest. The Source Mayweather boxing plus fitness employees walkout. Bad left hook Mayweather gym employees protest. Boxing News Mayweather gym workers protest. Hot 97 Mayweather employees walk out. Black Enterprise Mayweather gym employees protest. Fight Sports Mayweather boxing left me mentally damaged. Atlanta Black Star Mayweather reveals father has dementia. Bet Mayweather talks openly about memory loss. Bad left hook Rogers' deteriorating health influenced Mayweather's retirement. Nikki Swift the rare medical condition Floyd Mayweather